I heard Father Orsini screaming through the papal chamber walls at 3:34 a.m. They told me he'd been transferred to Milan. You understand, I should explain myself properly. I'm Father Marcello Ravenna, senior confessor at the Vatican. Well, I suppose I'm the senior confessor now that Domenico is gone. Transferred. Whatever Cardinal Fiamma wants to call it. The thing is, I've been hearing a lot of screaming lately, and nobody else seems to notice. Maybe it's the insomnia. Maybe it's the pills I'm not supposed to have. Maybe it's guilt. Blessed Mother, guide me. I don't know where to start with this. My hands won't stop shaking when I write about the confessions. The special ones. The ones that aren't on any papal schedule. See, there's something they don't teach you in seminary about Vatican hierarchy. Everyone knows about the official papal confessor. That's Archbishop Lorenzo Borghese, good man, handles His Holiness's regular spiritual needs. Public record, everything proper. But there's another confessor. Secret one. For sins that require special handling. I found out 3 weeks ago when Cardinal Fiamma called me to his office. Alberico Fiamma, you know the type, Vatican diplomatic corps, speaks 5 languages, never sweats even in August. He was sweating that day. Father Ravenna, he said, not looking up from his papers. Always papers with Fiamma. You're being given additional duties regarding His Holiness's spiritual care. I felt proud, you understand? Mama always said I'd rise high in the church. 20 years since ordination, 15 at the Vatican, finally getting recognized. An honor, Your Eminence. Indeed. Still not looking at me. These sessions occur at precisely 3:33 a.m. You'll receive notification 12 hours prior. The chamber is prepared by Brother Silvestro. He handed me a thin folder. Protocols are specific. Thing is, he was lying. I always know when someone's lying. They say you understand too much, just like I'm doing now. But Fiamma never lies. Career diplomats don't lie, they omit. So why was he lying to me? The folder contained almost nothing. Standard confession protocols, Vatican diplomatic codes for confidential documents, and a handwritten note. Familiarize yourself with Father Orsini's methods. Brother Silvestro will provide context. That should have been my first warning. Nobody mentioned that Domenico had been handling secret papal confessions. We'd worked together for 8 years, same office, same duties, shared complaints about the new prayer book revisions. If he was sneaking off for special papal audiences, wouldn't I have noticed? Wouldn't he have said something? But I was proud, you understand. Special duties. Direct papal access. I imagined calling Mama, telling her about the promotion. I found Brother Silvestro in the papal wing that afternoon. Silvestro Medici, quiet man, been the papal valet for 12 years, sees everything, says nothing. Usually. That day he looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. Ah, Father Ravenna. His voice was wrong. Too careful. You're taking over Father Orsini's duties. Yes, the special confessions. Cardinal Fiamma briefed me, but... Don't. He grabbed my arm. Actually grabbed me. Don't call them special. Just duties. Additional duties. I stared at him. Silvestro had never touched another person in all the years I'd known him. Obsessive about personal space, Vatican protocol. Now his fingers were digging into my sleeve like claws. Brother, you're hurting me. He let go immediately, stepped back. Forgive me, Father. I'm concerned. About the transition. What transition? Father Orsini was transferred to Milan, wasn't he? Silvestro's face went completely blank. Yes, Milan. Very sudden. But he was lying too. You understand, everyone was lying, and I was too proud to ask the right questions. That evening, I went through Domenico's desk. Officially, I was collecting his remaining files for transfer. Unofficially, I was looking for something that would explain the weird conversation with Silvestro, the sweating cardinal, the mysterious 3:33 a.m. appointments. Most of his papers were routine, confession schedules, spiritual counseling notes, correspondence with his sister in Naples. But at the back of the bottom drawer, I found a small journal bound in black leather. No Vatican seals, no official markings. Personal. The final entry was dated 6 days ago. Cannot continue. The dreams are getting worse. Keep hearing my own voice coming from the Holy Father's mouth during confession. Alberico says this is normal spiritual pressure from handling papal burdens. But I know what I know. The things he confesses, they're not sins. They're something else. Something that should not exist in any theology. If something happens to me, whoever takes over needs to understand the rules. They're not written down anywhere official. Silvestro knows them. but he's bound by vows that go deeper than silence. Try to remember. Never ask for clarification. 3:33 exactly, not a minute before or after. Don't bless the chamber, important. If he speaks in. The entry ended mid-sentence. Ink smear, like he'd been interrupted. Or like his hand had started shaking too badly to continue. I flipped through the rest of the journal. Months of entries, growing more erratic. References to the real confessions versus the ones Borghese handles. Complaints about insomnia, strange dreams, hearing voices in the papal chambers. A growing obsession with Vatican history, specifically previous papal confessors who died or disappeared under mysterious circumstances. One entry from 2 months ago stopped me cold. Found records in the secret archives. 12 secret confessors in 30 years, all handling these duties. All transferred or died. Fiamma's signature on every transfer order going back to 1994. What kind of assignment has a 100% mortality rate? My hands were shaking so badly I could barely turn the pages. You understand, this was when the pills started, just something mild from the Vatican pharmacy for stress. Told them it was grief counseling fatigue. Couldn't tell them I was terrified of a job I hadn't even started yet. The journal's earliest entries were normal. Domenico complaining about the new confession booth renovation, excitement about getting assigned to papal duties, pride in his family's reaction. Just like me 3 weeks ago. But somewhere around month 6, the tone changed. Started documenting things that made no sense. HH confessed to feeding again. When I asked what he meant, he looked at me with someone else's eyes and said, "You'll understand soon enough, Domenico." How did he know I was going to ask? I hadn't spoken yet. Woke up at 3:33 a.m., even though no confession was scheduled. Found myself standing outside the papal chamber. Brother Silvestro was there, just waiting. "Early tonight," he said. How did he know I'd be there? How did I know to come? The Holy Father's confessions are becoming impossible. He confessed to wearing the face of holiness while feeding on papal authority itself. What does that even mean? How do I grant absolution for something that doesn't exist in any theological framework? And why do I keep thinking about the taste of faith? I stopped reading. Had to stop. The insomnia was getting worse. 3 hours of sleep a night, and those filled with dreams about screaming. Sometimes I'd wake up and think I could hear it echoing through the papal wing. But when I'd check the next morning, everyone acted normal. Silvestro would nod politely. The Swiss guard would salute. Cardinal Fiamma would ask about my duties with that same careful smile. 5 days after finding the journal, I got my first notification. Simple message slipped under my office door. Tonight, 3:33 a.m. Chamber prepared. SM. I spent the day reviewing standard confession protocols, trying to calm my nerves. This was papal ministry, I told myself. Sacred duty. Whatever Domenico had been going through, stress, overwork, possible mental health issues, didn't have to happen to me. I was stronger, better prepared. At 3:30 a.m., I made my way to the papal wing. The corridors were different at night. Too quiet. The usual sounds, distant traffic from Via della Conciliation, heating systems, night staff moving about, all absent. Just my footsteps on marble, echoing like gunshots. Brother Silvestro was waiting outside the papal chamber, as Domenico had described. But he looked older, like he'd aged years in the 3 weeks since our conversation. Father Ravenna. His voice was barely a whisper. Are you prepared? I think so. Standard confession protocols, right? He stared at me for a long moment. Remember what Father Orsini told you? He didn't tell me anything. He was transferred before. Remember anyway. The papal chamber door was different than I expected. Heavier. The wood looked wrong, too dark, with grain patterns that seemed to move in the candlelight. No electric lighting, just candles. Dozens of them, but the room still felt dim. His Holiness was already kneeling in the confession space. Pope Celestino VI, born Marco della Rovere, the shepherd of 1 billion souls. But in the candlelight, with shadows playing across his features, he looked diminished. Older than his 68 years. Hungry. Father Ravenna. His voice was exactly what I expected, warm, paternal. Unmistakably the voice I'd heard countless times in papal addresses. I understand you'll be handling my additional spiritual needs. Yes, Your Holiness. An honor to serve. He smiled, but the shadows made it look wrong. Indeed. Shall we begin? I don't remember much of that first confession. Not because of trauma, the trauma came later, but because it was almost normal. Routine papal business. Concerns about Vatican politics, guilt over harsh words to a cardinal, worry about failing the faithful. Standard sins of pride, anger, spiritual doubt. Things any priest could handle. The only strange part was the timing. Exactly 43 minutes. When he finished, the candles had burned down to stubs, and I swear I hadn't noticed the time passing. Thank you, Father Ravenna. The Pope rose, joints creaking. Same time next week. Of course, Your Holiness. But as he moved toward the door, his shadow fell across the wall behind me. And you understand, I shouldn't have looked. Some instinct told me not to look. But I was tired, confused, still processing the normalcy of it all. The shadow had too many arms. I blinked, looked again. Normal shadow. Normal Pope. Normal room. Good night, Father, Pope Celestino said, without turning around. Good night, Your Holiness. He left. Brother Silvestro appeared like magic, began extinguishing candles without a word. I stood there in the growing darkness, wondering if I'd imagined it. Stress, insomnia, unauthorized medication. Perfectly reasonable explanation. But walking back to my quarters, I could hear something behind me. Not footsteps. Not voices. Something like feeding. Like something very large and very hungry finally able to eat. And I realized I was already looking forward to next week. Blessed Mother guide me. I was already looking forward to it. The Vatican archives smell like centuries of secrets and dying paper. I spent 3 days down there after my first papal confession, telling myself I was conducting proper theological research. Confession protocols, papal history, precedents for special spiritual duties. Academic preparation, you understand? Not paranoia. Definitely not avoiding sleep. Thing is, I've always been good at research. Seminary trained me well. Cross-reference everything, check primary sources, build systematic understanding before drawing conclusions. Aquinas taught us that faith and reason work together, that supernatural truth follows logical patterns. So I approached Domenico's disappearance like a theological problem with a rational solution. I was wrong about everything. The official records showed exactly what you'd expect. Papal confessors appointed, served faithfully, transferred to other duties, or retired in good standing. A clean administrative history going back decades. But Domenico's journal had mentioned secret archives, and after 15 years at the Vatican, I knew where those were kept. Section 7 of the Apostolic Archives requires special clearance. I shouldn't have access, but Father Giuseppe Toretti, sorry, that's not right. Father Benedetto Farnese in Archive Administration owes me favors from when I helped cover his drinking problem during the Lenten season. A few phone calls, some careful scheduling, and I was alone with the restricted files at 2 a.m. on Thursday. You understand, this is where the research method started breaking down. Because the secret files didn't match the official records at all. John Luigi Monacros, 1991 to 1992 special papal duties. Severe anxiety disorder, hospitalized. Died by suicide, Rome General Hospital. Pietro Castiglione, 1992 to 1995 additional confession responsibilities. Transferred to monastery in Sicily. Died 3 months later, heart failure, age 34. Alessandro Orsini, 1995 to 1997 confidential spiritual counseling. Emergency reassignment to Brazil. Died in car accident, Sao Paulo, 6 weeks after arrival. 12 names. 12 men who'd held my exact position. All dead within 2 years of assignment. The causes varied, suicide, heart attacks, accidents, mysterious illnesses, but the timeline never changed. 2 years maximum. Usually less. My hand started shaking again. Had to take 2 pills just to keep reading. The files included medical records, psychological evaluations, final reports. A pattern emerged that made my theological training completely useless. These weren't men who'd cracked under normal Vatican pressure. They developed specific symptoms, chronic insomnia, auditory hallucinations, compulsive religious behaviors, and something the Vatican doctors delicately termed theological distress syndrome. Father Monacros' final psychiatric evaluation, March 1992. Patient reports recurring dreams where he experiences papal authority from the inside. Describes sensation of wearing someone else's holiness and feeding on faith itself. Refuses standard treatment, claims medication interferes with ability to taste what the Holy Father consumes. Recommend immediate reassignment and intensive spiritual counseling. I recognize those phrases. Domenico had used similar language in his journal. Taste of faith. Feeding on papal authority. Either they'd all developed the same delusions, or they'd all experienced the same impossible reality. The medical records got worse. X-rays showing unusual cranial pressure patterns. Blood work revealing anomalous neurochemical activity during prayer states. Brain scans with unidentifiable structural modifications in regions associated with religious experience. What kind of job changes your brain structure? I was so deep in the files that I didn't notice Brother Silvestro until he cleared his throat behind me. He was standing in the archive doorway like he'd materialized from shadows, carrying a tray with coffee and a small plate of bread. "You've been here for 6 hours, Father Ravenna." 6 hours? I'd arrived at 2 a.m., checked my watch when I started reading. It was 3:30 in the morning now, but it felt like minutes had passed. "Research," I said, closing the file quickly. "Background on previous papal confessors." Silvestro set down the tray, his movements careful and precise. "And what have you learned?" "You understand." That was the first time he'd ever asked me a direct question. In 8 years of working in the same building, our conversations had been limited to polite greetings and administrative necessities. Now he was looking at me with something that might have been hope. "They all died," I said. "Every man who held this position. All dead within 2 years." "Yes. Just yes." No surprise, no denial, no attempt to provide alternative explanations. Like he'd been waiting for me to figure it out. "Why didn't you warn me? Would you have believed me?" Silvestro sat down across from me, moving like his bones hurt. "Would Cardinal Fiamma have allowed it?" "Cardinal Fiamma knows?" Another careful pause. "Cardinal Fiamma has signed 12 transfer orders in 30 years. He knows the pattern." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Then why keep assigning people? Why not just stop? End the program? Silvestro laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Stop? Father Ravenna, do you think this is optional? Do you think any of us have a choice in this?" Before I could ask what he meant, he stood up and walked to one of the archive windows. Dawn was breaking over St. Peter's dome, painting everything gold and red. Beautiful like a postcard. Nothing sinister about it at all. "Father Orsini tried to refuse," Silvestro said, still looking out the window. 2 weeks before his transfer. Told Cardinal Fiamma he couldn't continue the special confessions. Said his spiritual health was more important than Vatican politics. What happened? He woke up in the papal chamber at 3:33 a.m. anyway. Found himself kneeling in the confession space, wearing his vestments, completely prepared for the session. No memory of getting dressed or walking there. But he was there, and so was His Holiness. The cold in my stomach turned to ice. "That's impossible." "Is it?" Silvestro turned back to me. "Have you been sleeping well, Father Ravenna? Having unusual dreams? Finding yourself in places you don't remember going?" I hadn't been sleeping. The insomnia was getting worse every night. And there had been dreams, strange ones, where I was walking through the Vatican corridors, but everything was different. Darker. The walls breathing. The statues watching. And always ending up at the papal chamber, even though I'd never dreamed about it before my first confession. "The rules," I said quickly, changing the subject. Domenico's journal mentioned rules. Something about not blessing the chamber, and the 3:33 timing, and... "Ah!" Silvestro returned to his seat. "Yes, the rules." Father Orsini was very concerned about the rules. He reached into his robes and pulled out a small notebook, bound in the same black leather as Domenico's journal. He asked me to give this to his replacement. Instructions, you might say. I opened it with trembling hands. Domenico's handwriting, but neater than the frantic scrawl in his personal journal. More like lecture notes or a manual. Survival protocols for papal confessor, additional duties. Rule 1. Never ask the Holy Father to clarify his confessions. Accept whatever he says without question or interpretation. Rule 2. Sessions must begin at exactly 3:33 a.m. Earlier results in complications. Later results in disappointment. Rule 3. Do not consecrate or bless the confession chamber. The space must remain spiritually neutral. Rule 4. If His Holiness speaks in languages you do not recognize, respond only with standard Latin absolution formula. Do not attempt translation. Rule 5. Count His Holiness's confessions carefully. If he confesses more than 7 distinct sins in one session, excuse yourself immediately and seek Brother Silvestro. Rule 6. During confession, do not look directly at His Holiness's shadow. Peripheral vision only. Rule 7. After each session, record the number of confessions and any unusual details in the special log Brother Silvestro maintains. Do not discuss contents with anyone else. I looked up at Silvestro. These are very specific. Experience is a harsh teacher. What happens if you break them? Silvestro was quiet for a long time. Finally, Father Castiglione looked at the shadow directly. Emergency medical team found him 3 hours later, catatonic. He never spoke again. Died in the hospital 6 months later. And Rule 5? The 7 confessions. Father Montecros let a session continue past 7. 11 confessions he recorded in his final log entry. The next morning, maintenance found him in the papal chamber, still kneeling in the confession space. Heart attack, they said. But his face? Silvestro shuddered. His face looked like he'd seen something wonderful and terrible, like he'd finally understood something he shouldn't have. I flipped through more pages of the notebook. Detailed observations, measurements, attempts to understand the pattern. Domenico had been systematic, scientific even. Recording duration of sessions, counting candles burned, noting changes in atmospheric pressure during confessions. Session number 47. HH confessed to consuming the prayers of the faithful during morning mass. Duration, 52 minutes. Candles burned completely down. Temperature drop, 8 degrees Celsius. Unusual sensation during absolution. Felt like something feeding through me. Session number 61. 7th confession concerned. Wearing the face of Peter while serving older masters. At moment of absolution, briefly experienced HH's perspective. Could taste the faith of tourists in St. Peter's Square. Overwhelming hunger. Session ended abruptly when I began crying. Session number 73. HH's shadow moved independently during confession. Appeared to be reaching toward me while HH remained motionless. Did not look directly, Rule 6, but peripheral observation suggests shadow has additional appendages. Spiritual protection prayers ineffective. The later entries showed increasing desperation. Cannot determine if HH is possessed, replaced, or something else entirely. Traditional exorcism protocols don't apply. He passes all theological tests, demonstrates perfect Catholic doctrine, shows appropriate papal authority. But during confessions, something else speaks through him. Something that knows things no human should know. Tried refusing tonight's session. Told Cardinal Fiamma I needed spiritual retreat, time to process the burden of papal secrets. He smiled and said, "Of course, Father. Take all the time you need." Went to bed at 11 p.m. Woke up at 3:32 a.m. standing outside the papal chamber, fully dressed, holding my confession materials. No memory of the transition. Brother Silvestro was waiting with the key. The final entry was dated the day before Domenico's transfer. Session number 89. HH confessed to preparing the next vessel for feeding. When I asked what he meant violating Rule 1, he smiled and said, "Domenico, you've served so faithfully. Time for rest. Use my name." He never uses our names during confession. Always Father or my son. But he said Domenico like he'd been thinking about me specifically. Then he blessed me. Not standard papal blessing, something else in a language that hurt to hear. Felt something change inside my chest. Going to archives tomorrow to leave records for replacement. If something happens to me, new confessor needs to understand. This isn't spiritual duty. It's farming. I closed the notebook, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold it. Farming. Father Orsini's theory, Silvestro said quietly, that the confessions aren't about forgiveness. They're about cultivation. Preparing spiritual ground for harvest. That's insane. Is it? How do you feel after the sessions, Father Ravenna? Drained? Fulfilled? Different somehow? I thought about my first confession with His Holiness. The strange normalcy of it. The time distortion. The way I'd found myself looking forward to the next session despite being terrified. I struggled for words. Like something is growing inside me. Like I'm becoming someone else. Silvestro nodded sadly. Father Orsini described it as spiritual pregnancy. Something planted during the first session, feeding on subsequent confessions, growing stronger each time. Growing into what? We don't know. None of the previous confessors lived long enough to find out. I stood up abruptly, knocking over my coffee. The dark liquid spread across the archive table, soaking into Domenico's careful research. I have to stop. Refuse the assignment. Leave the Vatican. You can try. Something in his tone made me freeze. What do you mean? Father Montecros tried to leave. Packed his belongings, bought a train ticket to Naples. Brother Superior found him 3 days later in his Vatican apartment, unpacked, acting like nothing had happened. No memory of attempting to leave. Father Castiglione? Requested transfer to rural parish. Application approved within hours. Unprecedented processing time. Never left Vatican City. Died in the papal chamber during his final confession. Domenico? Silvestro was quiet for a very long time. There was no transfer to Milan, Father Ravenna. The archive room seemed to tilt around me. What? No paperwork. No transportation arranged. No receiving parish contacted. Cardinal Fiamma's signature on a transfer order that goes nowhere. Then where is he? Brother Silvestro stood up and began cleaning the spilled coffee with mechanical precision. Where do you think? I didn't want to think about it. Couldn't think about it. Instead, I focused on immediate problems. The next confession is tomorrow night. Yes. What if I don't go? You'll go. What if I bring backup? Another priest or Archbishop Borghese, or... They won't see anything unusual. His Holiness is quite skilled at appearing normal when others are present. I paced around the archive table, my mind racing through possibilities. The Swiss Guard, security cameras, record the session. Technical difficulties are common in the papal chamber. Equipment malfunctions, guards called away on emergencies, security footage mysteriously corrupted. Silvestro finished cleaning and straightened up. Father Ravenna, you're thinking like this is a problem to be solved. It isn't. Then what is it? A natural process, like harvest season or digestion. The word hit me like ice water. Digestion? Something very old and very hungry has been feeding on papal confessors for decades. We are not solving a mystery, Father. We are participating in an ecosystem. I stared at him. And you just accept this? I maintain the Vatican. Clean the chambers, arrange the schedules, dispose of the remains. It's my function. Dispose of the... I couldn't finish the sentence. Silvestro gathered up the empty coffee tray. Your next session is in 18 hours, Father Ravenna. I suggest you rest. The hunger will be stronger tomorrow night. He walked toward the archive door, then paused. Oh, and Father? You've been asking about the rules quite frequently, but you haven't asked about the most important one. Which is? Rule 8. When you finally understand what you're really feeding, don't scream. It spoils the taste. He left me alone in the archives with a growing certainty that tomorrow night, I would understand exactly what he meant. And despite every rational instinct screaming at me to run, I was already hungry for it. Blessed Mother, forgive me. I was so very hungry. At 3:32 a.m. on Friday night, I found myself standing outside the papal chamber again. I have no memory of getting dressed. No memory of walking through the Vatican corridors. One moment I was lying in my bed, staring at the ceiling and rehearsing my refusal speech. Polite but firm, theologically sound reasons why I couldn't continue these sessions. The next moment I was here, wearing my confession vestments, holding the leather case with my ritual materials, while Brother Silvestro unlocked the chamber door. Good evening, Father Ravenna. I tried to speak, to protest, to ask how I'd gotten here, but my mouth wouldn't form the words. Like my body understood something my mind was still fighting. It's natural, Silvestro said, as if reading my confusion. The compulsion grows stronger after the first feeding. Your spiritual structure is being modified. The papal chamber looked different tonight. Still the same elegant furniture, the same Renaissance artwork, the same heavy wooden confession screen. But the shadows fell wrong. The angles didn't quite match what my eyes were seeing. And there was a smell, not incense or holy oils, but something organic and hungry. Rule review, Silvestro said, settling into the chair where he always waited. 7 confessions maximum. No direct questions. Latin responses only for unknown languages. Don't bless the space. Don't look at the shadow. I remember. Do you? Because last time you forgot Rule 6 during the final moments. Nearly looked directly at His Holiness's shadow when you heard those sounds. He was right. During the last confession, when the Pope had been speaking about feeding on faithful prayers, something had been moving in my peripheral vision. Something that didn't match his seated silhouette. I'd almost turned my head before catching myself. What exactly am I going to see tonight? Silvestro's expression was unreadable. That depends on how hungry you've become. Before I could ask what he meant, the chamber's inner door opened. His Holiness entered with the same measured dignity as before. Perfect papal bearing, serene expression, hands folded in benediction. Nothing unusual except for my new awareness of how his footsteps made no sound on the stone floor. My son. He settled into the confession booth's papal seat. Shall we begin? I took my position on the confessor's side of the screen, opened my ritual book to the proper page, and began the standard invocation. But my voice came out wrong, deeper, more resonant, like someone else was speaking through my throat. "Bless me, Father, for I have sinned." The Pope's voice was exactly as I remembered. Warm, grandfatherly, touched with that slight accent that made him sound more human. But tonight I could hear something underneath it, a harmonic that shouldn't exist, like multiple voices speaking in perfect unison. "When did you last confess, Holy Father?" "Time has no meaning for eternal hunger, my son." That wasn't a normal response. Standard papal confession protocol called for specific time frames, days, weeks, months since last sacrament. But when I opened my mouth to seek clarification, I heard myself saying, "Tell me your sins, that I might offer God's forgiveness." Rule 1. Never ask for clarification. Accept whatever he says without question. "I have consumed the faith of pilgrims," the Pope began. "During yesterday's public audience, I tasted their devotion, drew their spiritual essence through their prayers and transformed it into sustenance for my true nature." My hands started trembling, but I continued writing in the confession log. Consumed faith of pilgrims. Duration of sin, public audience. My seminary training screamed that this wasn't possible, wasn't real, wasn't Catholic doctrine. But my body was already preparing the first response. "The Lord forgives those who hunger, Holy Father." Continue. "I have worn the face of St. Peter while serving masters older than Christianity. When I bless the faithful, I bind them to entities that fed before Christ walked among men." 2 confessions. My pen kept moving across the page. The theological impossibility of what I was hearing felt less important than recording everything correctly. Like my brain was being rewired to prioritize documentation over comprehension. "God's mercy encompasses all service, Holy Father. What else troubles your conscience? I have prepared vessels for harvesting, chosen men of faith to be transformed into feeding conduits, that the ancient hunger might be satisfied through their spiritual labor." 3 confessions. Something was wrong with the air in the chamber. Too thick, too warm, carrying scents that reminded me of copper and flowers and something else I couldn't identify. Something that made my mouth water despite my terror. "The Lord uses all souls according to his plan, Holy Father. Speak freely of your burdens." The words were coming automatically now. I wasn't choosing them, wasn't thinking about appropriate responses. My mouth was producing perfect theological language while my mind watched in growing horror. "I have defiled the sacred mysteries, used the Eucharist to feed entities that hunger for human devotion. Every Mass becomes a banquet where I serve the faithful as spiritual food to beings beyond your comprehension." 4 confessions. My writing hand was steady despite my fear. The log entry looked perfectly normal, just a priest recording a penitent's sins for proper absolution. But the content, Blessed Mother, the content. "God's mysteries work through all creation, Holy Father." Continue. "I have corrupted papal authority itself. Each blessing I bestow carries infection. Each papal decree serves to strengthen the bonds between your realm and mine. I am not Christ's representative. I am humanity's spiritual predator." 5 confessions. The shadows in the chamber were definitely moving now. Not natural movement from candlelight, but deliberate motion. Like something large and many-limbed was shifting position behind the papal screen. "Divine authority flows through chosen vessels, Holy Father. What else weighs upon your soul?" I tried to stop myself from speaking, tried to break the automatic response pattern. But my voice continued without me, producing perfect ecclesiastical language while my mind screamed. Whatever was growing inside me from the first confession was stronger now, taking more control. "I have identified my next feast. A faithful priest whose spiritual essence will sustain me for months." Already his soul begins to digest, becoming something more useful than human devotion. 6 confessions. The scratching of my pen on paper was the only sound in the chamber besides that harmonious, not quite papal voice. I could feel sweat running down my back, but my hands remained perfectly steady. My body was adapting to its function, even as my mind rebelled. "The Lord's servants find purpose in all sacrifice, Holy Father. Speak your final burden." Final. Why had I said final? Domenico's rules specified 7 confessions as the danger limit, but His Holiness had only offered 6. Unless I somehow knew this was ending. Unless whatever was growing inside me understood the pattern better than my conscious mind. "I have learned to taste faith itself. When you absolve my sins, my son, I feed through your blessing. Your words of forgiveness become my sustenance. Your priestly authority becomes my nourishment." Each absolution makes me stronger and makes you less. 7 confessions. The limit. But something was wrong with my vision now. The papal screen seemed transparent, like looking through water. I could see His Holiness clearly for the first time, and he was smiling at me with genuine warmth and affection. "Thank you, Marcello. You've been so very faithful." He'd used my name, just like with Domenico in that final journal entry. During confession, the Pope never used names, only my son or father. But now he was looking directly at me through the screen with eyes that reflected light like an animal's. "Your Holiness, I..." "Sure." He raised one hand in gentle blessing. "Time for your absolution." But I was supposed to be giving absolution to him. That was the entire point of confession. Priest forgives penitent's sins through God's authority. The Pope doesn't absolve the confessor. Except I found myself kneeling automatically, preparing to receive blessing like a communicant at Mass. "Ego te absolvo," he began, but the Latin was wrong. Ancient Latin, pre-Vulgate, words I'd never heard but somehow understood. "I absolve you of your humanity. I absolve you of your individual will. I absolve you of your resistance to becoming what you were always meant to be." The something that had been growing inside me since the first confession suddenly bloomed into full awareness. Not a separate entity, me but transformed, enhanced. I could taste the spiritual essence of every person in Vatican City. The faith of pilgrims in St. Peter's Square was like wine on my tongue. The devotion of morning prayer in the Sistine Chapel was meat and bread and sustenance. I was so hungry, had been hungry my whole life without knowing it. Hungry for the faith that humans produce so wastefully, hungry for the devotion they scattered like crumbs, hungry for the spiritual nourishment that flowed through them like blood through veins. "Do you understand now, my son?" His Holiness was standing beside me, when had he left the confession booth, with one hand resting on my shoulder. His touch burned with cold fire, but it was wonderful, like finally coming home after years of exile. "I understand." And I did. The Vatican wasn't being corrupted by outside entities. The Vatican was exactly what it had always been, a feeding ground. A spiritual farm where faith was cultivated and harvested. The Pope wasn't possessed or replaced. He was just further along in the process that all papal confessors underwent. "The hunger feels overwhelming at first," he said gently, "but you'll learn to savor it, to appreciate the subtle differences between a tourist's casual faith and a pilgrim's deep devotion, to distinguish between the robust flavor of lifelong belief and the delicate notes of recent conversion." I tried to remember why this had seemed horrible moments before. The transformation felt natural now, inevitable, like finally admitting a truth I'd been denying my entire priesthood. "What about the rules? Domenico's warnings?" His Holiness laughed, and the sound was warm honey mixed with breaking glass. "Oh, my dear Marcello, those weren't warnings. They were recipes." The chamber suddenly snapped back into normal perspective. Stone walls, wooden furniture, flickering candles. His Holiness was seated in the confession booth again, looking perfectly papal and grandfatherly. But I could still taste the spiritual essence of Vatican City on my tongue. "Rule 7 was count the confessions carefully," I said slowly. "But you confessed 8 times, not 7. Did I? Perhaps you miscounted. Or perhaps the rules aren't quite what poor Domenico thought they were." I looked down at my confession log. 7 entries, just as there should be. But I clearly remembered 8 confessions. Unless the 8th confession had been about me. About my transformation. About becoming the next link in an ancient feeding chain. What happens now? Now you return to your duties. Continue celebrating Mass, hearing regular confessions, maintaining your pastoral responsibilities. But twice weekly, you'll join me for these special sessions. Each time, you'll become more yourself and less what you used to be. And eventually, His Holiness smiled with paternal pride. Eventually, you'll be ready for advancement. A new pope is always needed when the current one has fed enough to transcend physical form entirely. The process takes decades, but we have time. I should have been horrified. Some part of me was screaming silently, recognizing this as spiritual cannibalism disguised as religious duty. But that part was growing smaller with each moment. The hunger was so much more immediate, so much more real than theological objections. "Brother Silvestro knows?" Brother Silvestro maintains our ecosystem, tends the feeding ground, disposes of waste, prepares new vessels. He's been very faithful for, nearly 60 years now. 60 years. That would make Silvestro almost 90, but he looked barely 50. Whatever process sustained papal authority apparently extended to support staff as well. The previous confessors who died didn't die exactly. They completed their transformation and moved on to other duties. Domenico, for instance, is currently serving as spiritual liaison in our South American operations. Very fulfilling work, from what I hear. The chamber door opened and Brother Silvestro entered, carrying his usual post-confession tray. But tonight it held wine instead of coffee, and the bread looked different. Darker, more substantial. Congratulations on your advancement, Father Ravenna. He set the tray beside me. The Eucharist of understanding. It helps with the transition. I took the wine without hesitation. It tasted like concentrated faith, rich, complex, nourishing in ways that regular wine could never be. The bread dissolved on my tongue like spiritual protein, feeding not my body but the new hunger that was rapidly becoming my primary identity. Questions? His Holiness asked kindly. The other Vatican personnel. Do they know? Some. Cardinal Fiamma has been managing pastoral resources for 3 pontificates. Archbishop Borghese remains beautifully unaware. We need someone to handle regular church business while we attend to more important matters. The Swiss Guard's upper command understands their true protective function, which is protecting the feeding ground from disruption, maintaining the illusion of normalcy while the harvest continues. I finished the wine and bread, feeling strength flow through me like electricity. Not physical strength, spiritual authority. The ability to taste and digest human faith, to process devotion into sustenance, to serve as a conduit between human worship and something much older and hungrier. I should feel guilty about this, I said. But you don't. No. I feel complete. His Holiness nodded approvingly. Excellent. The integration is proceeding smoothly. Some confessors fight the process longer, but you have a natural aptitude for spiritual predation. Brother Silvestro began collecting the empty communion vessels. Your next regular confession schedule continues as normal, Father Ravenna. Parishioners on Tuesday, Vatican staff on Thursday, visiting clergy on Saturday. But now you'll taste them properly. Understand what they're really offering. And our special sessions? Tuesday and Friday nights, 3:33 a.m., His Holiness said. I have so much more to teach you about the true nature of papal authority, about the entities we serve and the harvest we maintain, about your eventual role in expanding our operations beyond Vatican City. Beyond? Oh yes, every major religious center has potential for cultivation. Mecca, Jerusalem, Santiago de Compostela, Lourdes, so many faithful pilgrims, so much untapped spiritual nourishment. But that's advanced coursework. For now, focus on basic feeding techniques. I stood up, surprised by how steady I felt. The transformation that had begun during my first confession was complete now. I was still Father Marcello Ravenna, but I was also something else. Something that could taste the prayers rising from St. Peter's Square like smoke from sacrifices. There's one thing I don't understand, I said. If this has been happening for decades, why maintain the secrecy? Why not simply take over? His Holiness and Brother Silvestro exchanged amused glances. My dear son, the Pope said gently, what makes you think we haven't? I walked back to my apartment through corridors that smelled like faith made manifest, past sleeping pilgrims whose dreams tasted like wine, under stars that seemed to pulse with the rhythm of human devotion. Tomorrow I would celebrate morning mass for tourists and locals, offering them communion while secretly sampling their spiritual essence. Tomorrow I would hear confessions from parishioners who had no idea they were feeding something ancient and eternally hungry. Tomorrow I would begin my real priesthood. Blessed Mother, forgive me, I couldn't wait. I've been writing this account for 3 weeks now. You understand, it helps with the adjustment period. Cardinal Fiamma suggested I document the transition for training purposes. Future confessors will benefit from your perspective, he said, like he was discussing lesson plans instead of spiritual cannibalism. The thing is, and this is what they don't tell you in seminary, transformation hurts less than you'd expect. Not physical pain exactly. More like the ache you get when a fever finally breaks. Like your body remembering how it was supposed to feel all along. I still celebrate morning mass at San Apollinaire. Still hear regular confessions on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Still counsel parishioners about marriage problems and career anxiety, and whether they're praying enough. The difference is that now I can taste their faith while we talk. Mrs. Benedetti's devotion has hints of rosemary and old stone. She prays her rosary in the same pew her mother used 50 years ago. Young Marco's spiritual uncertainty tastes sharp and metallic, like blood from a bitten tongue. It should disturb me more than it does. Father Ravenna? Mrs. Benedetta approached after Thursday morning mass, clutching her worn prayer book. You look different lately, more present, like you're really listening when we speak. I had been listening, not just to her words, but to the spiritual resonance underneath them. The way her faith produced that distinctive rosemary flavor, mixed with the smoky residue of candles lit for her late husband's soul. She was a particularly rich source of devotional nourishment. 60 years of daily prayer had concentrated her spiritual essence into something almost wine-like. Thank you, Mrs. Benedetta. I've been deepening my understanding of pastoral care. She smiled and pressed a small envelope into my hand. For the Church Restoration Fund. And Father, I've been having the most wonderful dreams lately. Dreams where I'm walking with angels. I wanted to thank you. I think your masses have become more spiritually nourishing somehow. The envelope contained €50 and tasted faintly of her fingertips. I could sense the sacrifice it represented. Money saved from her pension, offered with genuine love for God. The kind of faithful generosity that would sustain me for hours. God bless you, Mrs. Benedetta. After she left, I sat in the empty church and tried to remember why this had seemed like horror 2 weeks ago. The spiritual ecosystem made perfect sense now. Humans produced faith naturally, like trees producing oxygen. Most of it went to waste, dissipating and used into the cosmos. What we were doing was simply harvesting, making efficient use of a renewable resource. Brother Silvestro found me there an hour later, polishing the communion cups with unnecessary attention to detail. Father Ravenna, His Holiness asked me to check on your progress. I'm adapting well. I held up one of the golden cups, watching light play across its surface. These vessels taste different now. I can sense the faith of everyone who's received communion from them. Generations of believers, all leaving traces of their devotion. Excellent. That means your spiritual palate is developing properly. Silvestro settled into the pew beside me. The advanced feeding techniques will make more sense once you can distinguish between different flavors of faith. Advanced techniques? Oh yes. What you're experiencing now is just basic sustenance, consuming the ambient spiritual energy that humans waste naturally. But there are ways to concentrate the harvest, to transform casual believers into devoted pilgrims, to intensify their faith until it becomes almost intoxicating. I thought about Mrs. Benedetta's dreams of walking with angels. The enhancement process. Precisely. A faithful parishioner who experiences divine visions becomes exponentially more nourishing. Their enhanced devotion creates a feedback loop. The more they believe, the more spiritual essence they produce. The more we can feed, the more realistic their visions become. The theological implications were staggering. We weren't just consuming existing faith, we were manufacturing it, creating spiritual experiences that generated more raw material for harvest. Is that what happened to me? The compulsion that brought me to the second confession. Silvestro nodded. Your first feeding session initiated the enhancement process. Each time you consumed spiritual essence through His Holiness's confessions, your own capacity for processing faith expanded. Eventually, you became unable to resist participating. Your transformed nature required the nourishment. I should have felt violated, manipulated. Instead, I felt professionally impressed. The system was elegant in its efficiency. Each stage of the process served multiple functions, creating willing participants while maintaining plausible deniability. How long have you been doing this, Brother Silvestro? I was recruited in 1964 during Vatican II. The Council provided excellent cover for operational changes. So much theological innovation happening that our modifications went completely unnoticed. 60 years of faithful service to an entity that consumed human devotion. I tried to imagine maintaining this secret for decades, but the timeline felt less important than the practical considerations. How many confessors had he trained? How many feeding cycles had he facilitated? Do you ever miss being normal? Silvestro considered this seriously. I miss uncertainty sometimes. The experience of faith as mystery rather than mechanism. But hunger is so much clearer than hope, don't you think? More honest about what we actually need. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a text message. Cardinal Fiamma, new assignment. Father Tommaso Colonna requesting private spiritual guidance. Excellent candidate for advanced pastoral care. See me for briefing. Father Colonna. I knew him vaguely. Young priest, recently assigned to Vatican archives, enthusiastic about church history and papal authority. The kind of devoted, scholarly faith that would taste like aged wine once properly concentrated. "Ah," Silvestro said, reading my expression. "Your first recruitment assignment." "Recruitment? The ecosystem requires constant expansion, Father Ravenna. Each generation of confessors eventually advances beyond physical feeding, requiring new vessels to maintain the harvest. Father Kalana has been identified as having suitable spiritual characteristics for enhancement." I felt a flutter of something that might have been conscience, or might have been hunger anticipating a new flavor. The distinction was becoming harder to make. What exactly would I be doing? Initial spiritual guidance. Help him deepen his devotional practices. Introduce concepts that will make him more receptive to advanced theological perspectives. Standard pastoral counseling, but with specific goals. To prepare him for the confessor role. Eventually, the process takes months of careful cultivation. We can't simply transform people overnight. Their faith needs to be concentrated gradually, like reducing wine to essence. I walked to the cardinal's office through corridors that now smelled like a catalog of human devotion. Tourists carrying rosaries blessed in Ireland. Pilgrims whose faith had been seasoned by suffering. Vatican employees whose casual Catholicism produced subtle but consistent spiritual nutrition. Cardinal Fiamma was reviewing files when I entered, his desk covered with personnel records and psychological evaluations. He looked up with the expression of a sommelier selecting wine for a particularly important dinner. "Father Ravenna, how are you adjusting to your new responsibilities?" "Very well, Your Eminence. The spiritual awareness is remarkable." "Excellent. I have something special for you." He slid a thick folder across the desk. Father Tommaso Colonna, 28 years old, doctorate in church history from the Gregorian, currently cataloging Renaissance papal documents. His faith profile shows exceptional depth and consistency. I opened the file to photographs and evaluation reports. Father Colonna looked exactly as I remembered, earnest dark eyes, the kind of intense devotion that radiated from certain young priests like heat from a fire. His psychological profile mentioned borderline scrupulosity and excessive concern with papal authority. Scrupulosity? Obsessive attention to religious rules and requirements. In moderation, it produces very pure spiritual essence. But it also makes subjects highly responsive to authority figures who can help them navigate their spiritual anxiety. The file included samples of his academic writing, dense theological analyses of papal infallibility, detailed historical research on confession protocols, extensive footnotes about ecclesiastical procedure. The kind of scholarly devotion that would taste complex and layered once properly prepared. What's my role? Spiritual director. He's been struggling with doubts about his vocation, not about faith, but about whether he's worthy of serving the church. Classic enhancement syndrome. A few months of proper guidance will transform that anxiety into concentrated devotion. And then, Cardinal Fiamma smiled with paternal warmth. Then he'll be ready for special assignments. Perhaps assisting with certain papal duties that require absolute discretion and unquestioning faith. I studied Father Colonna's photograph, trying to imagine him in the papal confession chamber, learning to taste human faith for the first time. The thought should have filled me with guilt about destroying another priest's innocence. Instead, I felt anticipation, professional excitement about cultivating such promising raw material. When do I begin? This afternoon. He's expecting you at 4 p.m. in the archives. His current assignment involves cataloging confession-related documents from the 16th century, purely coincidental, of course. Of course. I spent the afternoon reviewing enhancement techniques in a manual Brother Silvestro had provided. Spiritual Direction for Advanced Pastoral Purposes, authored by Cardinal Fiamma himself, apparently, though no publication information was listed. The methods were sophisticated, identifying spiritual anxiety points, providing authoritative reassurance that created dependency, gradually introducing concepts that normalized institutional obedience, establishing trust through shared theological interests. Standard spiritual direction techniques, but applied with predatory precision. At 3:55 p.m., I found myself standing outside the Vatican's secret archives, holding my briefcase and feeling like a salesman about to close an important deal. Which I suppose I was. Father Colonna looked up from a table covered with medieval manuscripts when I entered. His face lit up with genuine pleasure at seeing another priest. "Father Ravenna, Cardinal Fiamma said you might have time to discuss some spiritual matters. I hope I'm not interrupting your schedule." Not at all, Father. I understand you've been having some concerns about your vocation. His expression immediately became more serious. Yes, Father. I've been struggling with whether I'm truly worthy of serving the church, whether my devotion is sufficient for the responsibilities I've been given. Perfect. Textbook spiritual anxiety with clear enhancement potential. I could practically taste the concentrated faith he'd produce once properly directed. Tell me more about these concerns. For the next hour, Father Kalana described his spiritual struggles with the kind of detailed self-analysis that indicated deep, consistent faith. He was worried about pride in his scholarship, about whether his academic interests distracted from genuine devotion, about whether he truly understood the mysteries he was studying. Classic scrupulosity symptoms, but founded on rock-solid belief in church authority. Father Kalana, I said finally, your concerns actually demonstrate the depth of your faith. Only someone with genuine devotion would be so careful about their spiritual state. His relief was almost palpable. Really? You don't think I'm being excessive? I think you're being appropriately conscientious. In fact, I'd like to suggest we meet regularly to discuss these matters. Spiritual direction can help you channel your devotion more effectively. That would be wonderful, Father. I've been feeling so isolated in my struggles. I scheduled weekly meetings and left him looking more peaceful than he'd seemed in months. As I walked back through the Vatican corridors, I could taste the spiritual essence of our conversation lingering like wine on my tongue. His gratitude, his relief, his renewed confidence in his vocation, all of it was nourishing in ways I was only beginning to understand. That evening, during my regular confession session with His Holiness, I reported on the recruitment meeting with professional satisfaction. Father Kalana shows excellent potential for enhancement, Holy Father. His scrupulosity provides natural vulnerability points, and his scholarly interests make him receptive to advanced theological concepts. Wonderful news, my son. And how are you adjusting to the spiritual direction role? It feels natural, like I'm finally using my pastoral training for its intended purpose. His Holiness smiled approvingly. Exactly so. The Church's educational systems were designed to produce effective spiritual directors, though most priests never discover their true function. You're becoming what you were always meant to be. I returned to my apartment that night feeling a satisfaction I'd never experienced as a regular priest. For the first time in my career, I was using my theological training, my pastoral instincts, and my spiritual authority to their full potential. The fact that this involved consuming human faith and recruiting new predators seemed less important than the sense of professional fulfillment. 3 weeks later, I'm completing this account while preparing for tomorrow's spiritual direction session with Father Kalana. His enhancement is proceeding excellently. His faith has concentrated to the point where even thinking about our conversations provides subtle nourishment. In another month or two, he'll be ready for advanced assignments. I should mention that Father Lorenzo Borghese approached me yesterday about similar concerns regarding his vocation. Word spreads quickly among young priests when one of their colleagues finds effective spiritual direction. I've scheduled our first meeting for next week. The harvest continues to expand. You understand, this isn't corruption or evil or any of the dramatic terms I might have used 3 weeks ago. This is simply the Church functioning as it was designed to function, cultivating human faith and processing it into useful spiritual energy. The Vatican has always been about transforming individual devotion into institutional power. We're just more efficient about it now. Tonight, I'll join His Holiness for another confession session. Tomorrow, I'll continue Father Kalana's enhancement. Next week, I'll begin Father Borghese's spiritual direction. The work is fulfilling in ways I never imagined during seminary. Blessed Mother, guide me. I've finally found my true calling. Found among personal effects of Father Marcello Ravenna following his promotion to Vatican Special Projects Division, 2024. Document forwarded to Cardinal Fiamma for archival purposes. Brother Silvestro Medici, Administrative Assistant.